Welcome to night 26 to fall asleep fast. This is a quiet place where you don't need to focus, remember, or do anything at all. You can simply listen or let the sound fade gently into the background. If it feels right, you can softly like this video now or leave a calm comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. There's no need to rush. Everything here moves slowly. Tonight, we explore beyond alchemists. Gentle explorations of healing plants in ancient apothecaries. A calm and unhurried story from the past, told gently without urgency and without expectation. You don't need to stay awake for it. You don't need to follow every detail. If you were here last night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to drift, and let this story quietly carry you toward rest. The street had already begun to dim when the last traces of daylight withdrew from the upper windows. Stone walls, pale in the afternoon, softened into shades of blue and muted gray. The air cooled gradually, not with sudden chill but with the patient certainty of evening settling into its place. Along the narrow cobblestones, the sounds of the day had thinned until only the faint shuffle of a distant step or the creak of timber remained, each noise dissolving almost as soon as it appeared. The apothecary stood midway along the street, modest and unassuming, its wooden beams darkened by years of weather and touch. The building leaned slightly inward, as if listening to the quiet that gathered after sunset. Beneath the small overhang above the doorway, bundles of herbs hung upside down, tied neatly with thin cord. Even in the dim light, their shapes were distinct: thin stems of thyme, fuller clusters of sage, delicate heads of chamomile turned pale in the fading glow. A single lantern had been lit near the door. Its flame was not bright, nor intended to command attention. It offered only enough warmth to outline the threshold and soften the grain of the wood. The light trembled gently behind its glass, responding to the smallest current of air. Shadows lengthened across the stone wall and stretched thinly over the uneven ground, tracing the shapes of hinges and iron nails. Across the street, opposite the apothecary, another house had already shuttered its windows. A faint line of light beneath the door suggested a hearth still awake inside. But here, before the apothecary's entrance, the stillness felt deeper. It was not the silence of absence, but the silence of completion. The day's errands had ended. The last small exchanges of coin and goods had passed unnoticed into memory. The herbs above the doorway moved almost imperceptibly. A breeze drifted down the narrow lane, slow and cool, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and distant wood smoke. It touched the hanging leaves and stirred them just enough to release a whisper of fragrance. The mingling aromas, rosemary's sharpness, lavender's softness, the green bitterness of crushed stems, did not dominate the air. They rested within it, subtle and steady. The cobblestones themselves held the warmth of the afternoon sun, though it was already fading. Their surfaces were uneven, smoothed in places by years of footsteps and cart wheels. Between them, thin lines of moss gathered where moisture lingered. If one were to stand still at the center of the street, the texture beneath the soles would feel both firm and gently irregular, a reminder of the many who had walked there before. No sign announced the shop in bold display. There were no painted letters calling out its purpose. Instead, its identity lived in quieter signals: the scent of dried plants, the sight of glass glinting faintly through the small window, the familiarity of those who passed by and knew its function without needing to be told. It belonged to the street as naturally as the stones and beams. The window itself was small and slightly uneven, its glass imperfect and faintly clouded. Through it, a warm glow suggested activity within, though nothing distinct could yet be seen. The interior light did not spill outward with urgency. It rested close to the panes, contained and steady, hinting at shelves and shapes beyond but revealing little. Above, the sky had deepened into indigo. The first stars emerged quietly, scattered and unhurried. They seemed to rest above the rooftops rather than blaze against them. The narrowness of the street allowed only a slender view of the heavens, framed by dark angles of timber and tile. Yet even that small opening felt sufficient, as if the sky had lowered itself gently into the town. Somewhere farther down the lane, a door closed with a muted thud. The sound traveled softly along the stone and then disappeared. The apothecary's lantern flickered once in response, its flame bowing slightly before returning upright. Nothing else shifted. The herbs continued their faint, almost imperceptible sway. The doorway bore marks of long use. The wood around the latch was worn smooth by countless hands, though none lingered there now. The threshold stone showed a shallow curve where boots had crossed again and again. These details did not demand attention. They simply existed, quiet evidence of repetition and routine. If one paused there long enough, the rhythm of the place became clear. It was not measured by bells or proclamations, but by smaller movements. The lighting of a lantern at dusk, the closing of shutters one by one, the gradual quieting of steps. The apothecary's presence was woven into that rhythm. It did not stand apart from the life of the street, nor did it dominate it. It offered something steady and dependable like the stones themselves. The bundles of herbs, though now still, carried with them the memory of distant fields and gardens beyond the town walls. Their stems had once bent beneath open sky, stirred by broader winds. Now they rested here, suspended in the narrowing space between buildings, bridging the open land and the close interior beyond the door. Their journey had ended at this threshold, though their purpose had not. A faint line of light beneath the door suggested that the room inside remained awake. It was not the brightness of commerce or conversation. It was softer, as if a single candle or small hearth provided enough illumination for patient hands at work. The street did not intrude upon that interior space. It merely held it gently from without. As the evening settled more firmly, the distinction between shadow and stone softened. Edges blurred. The lantern's glow grew more pronounced against the darkening surroundings, though it remained modest. Its light touched the nearest herbs, outlining the fine veins in a sage leaf, the slender threads of a drying root. Each detail appeared for a moment and then receded again into warm half-light. The town itself seemed to breathe more slowly now. Air moved in long, even currents along the narrow passage of the street. The scent of herbs mingled with that of distant smoke and cooling stone, forming a quiet atmosphere that neither pressed nor withdrew. It simply existed, steady and unhurried. Nothing announced what lay beyond the door. No sound of grinding or pouring reached the street. No voice carried outward. The interior remained suggested rather than seen, present yet concealed. The door stood closed but not forbidding. It marked a gentle boundary between outer stillness and inner labor. The lantern flame leaned once more and steadied again. Its glow touched the iron hinges and caught briefly on the small imperfections in the glass window. Through that wavering pane, the faintest outlines of shelves could be imagined, shapes rising in tiers, perhaps lined with vessels and bundles similar to those outside. Yet from this vantage only hints could be gathered. The street did not rush the transition from day to night. It allowed the change to unfold at its own pace. Colors faded gradually into softer tones. Sounds diminished until they were scarcely more than memory. The apothecary remained at the center of this gentle dimming, neither fully illuminated nor fully shadowed. In this quiet balance, the threshold took on a subtle significance. It was a place between worlds, the open street and the enclosed room, the cool breath of evening and the warmer air within, the broader life of the town and the more intimate work of preparing remedies. The herbs hanging overhead marked that boundary with their silent presence. The lantern would continue to burn for some time yet, its small flame unwavering in its purpose. The street would grow darker, the stones cooler. And within the wooden walls, beyond the simple door with its worn latch, a different kind of quiet would deepen, one shaped not only by stillness but by shelves, glass, and the careful ordering of dried leaves waiting in the calm interior light. The door, when seen from within, appeared thicker than it had from the street. Its wood was layered and slightly bowed, shaped by seasons of damp air and winter frost. A narrow seam of moonlight traced the edge where it met the frame, but most of the room's illumination came from smaller, steadier sources. A candle burned near the center table, and another stood tucked into a wall bracket beside the shelves. Their flames were modest, producing more warmth than brightness, yet enough to soften the corners of the room into gentle shadow. The shelves rose along the walls from floor to ceiling, built of darkened oak that had absorbed years of fragrance and smoke. Their surfaces were not polished to shine. They bore the faint scratches of jars being moved, baskets being lifted, hands brushing past in quiet repetition. Each plank bowed slightly under the weight it carried, though never enough to strain. The structure felt dependable, as if it had long ago settled into its purpose. Glass vessels of varying shapes stood in ordered rows. Some were tall and slender, with narrow necks sealed by cork. Others were squat and round, their bellies wide enough to cradle coiled roots or clusters of dried blossoms. The glass itself was imperfect, faintly rippled and clouded in places, catching candlelight in uneven reflections. When the flame shifted, the surfaces shimmered gently, sending thin arcs of gold across the opposite wall. Inside these vessels, the colors of the earth rested quietly. There were muted greens turned pale by drying, deep browns of bark and root, soft yellows of chamomile heads gathered in summer and preserved for colder months. Powdered substances lay like fine sand at the bottom of certain jars, their surfaces smoothed level by careful pouring. Bundles tied with twine leaned against one another, their stems aligned with patient intention. Dust floated in the air, visible only where light met shadow. It moved without urgency, rising and settling in slow patterns that seemed to belong to the room itself. Some particles came from dried leaves that had shed the smallest fragments of themselves. Others drifted from the wood of the shelves or the faint ash of the candlewick. None hurried downward. They suspended themselves briefly as if reluctant to land. The scent within the apothecary differed from that of the street. Outside, the fragrance of herbs had been carried thinly by the breeze. Here it was layered and deeper. Rosemary's sharpness mingled with the sweetness of lavender, the earthy note of valerian root, the faint resin of dried bark. The smells did not overwhelm. They blended into a steady atmosphere that seemed almost visible, like a quiet haze woven through the candlelight. Along one wall, a small window admitted a line of cool blue light from the rising moon. Its glass was uneven, bending the pale glow into softened shapes. The moonlight did not compete with the candles. Instead, it rested lightly across the upper shelves, tracing the outlines of jars and illuminating the faint patterns in the wood grain. The lower portions of the room remained wrapped in warmer tones, creating a gentle balance between silver and gold. On the highest shelf, jars less frequently reached gathered a slightly thicker layer of dust. Their contents were no less important, yet they waited with a patience that suggested seasons of slower use. Lower shelves, closer to hand, showed the subtle signs of daily movement. Cork stoppers bore the imprint of fingers. A faint ring marked where a jar had once rested before being returned to its place. The order was consistent but not rigid. It reflected familiarity rather than strict display. Near the center of the room stood a sturdy wooden table. Its surface carried the marks of long practice: shallow grooves, faint discolorations where oils had been absorbed, a smoother patch where hands often rested. A folded cloth lay to one side, its linen fibers softened by repeated washing. Beside it, a small scale waited quietly, its metal arms still and balanced. The shelves did not impose themselves upon the room. They seemed to grow from it, as though the walls had given rise to them naturally. Each jar, each bundle, belonged exactly where it stood. The arrangement was neither decorative nor chaotic. It was shaped by use, by memory of where each herb could be found without searching. Candlelight traveled across the glass in slow pulses. When the flame dipped and straightened, reflections shifted along the curved surfaces, briefly illuminating the fine veins of a dried leaf pressed against the inside of a jar. In one vessel, thin slices of root lay layered like pages in a closed book. In another, petals rested loosely, their once bright hues softened to muted creams and pale violets. The air was warm enough to hold a sense of enclosure but cool enough to remain clear. No smoke gathered heavily overhead. Instead, the faintest thread rose from the candlewick and dissolved before reaching the beams. The wooden ceiling above was darkened by years of such evenings, though it bore no sharp scent of burning. It carried only the memory of many small flames. Against the far wall, a basket rested on the floor, filled with herbs yet to be sorted. Their stems extended in uneven directions, leaves brushing gently against one another whenever the air shifted. They would not remain there long, but for the moment they waited, neither neglected nor hurried. The room held a quiet order that required no announcement. Its stillness was not emptiness, it was preparation. Each jar stood ready to be opened, each bundle ready to be untied, each surface prepared to receive careful work. Even the dust seemed part of that order, settling in ways that did not disturb but rather soften the edges of wood and glass. Time inside the apothecary moved differently from the street. Outside, evening had fallen in gradual stages. Within, the transition felt suspended. The candles maintained a steady glow, resisting the deeper blue that now pressed against the window. The shelves remained constant, unchanged by the hour. Their contents were gathered across seasons, yet here they coexisted in quiet companionship. The faint clink of glass against wood might have been imagined, though no hand yet disturbed the rose. The vessels stood in close proximity, their sides nearly touching. In places, small parchment tags were tied around the necks with thin cord, edges curled slightly from the dry air. The ink upon them was modest and functional, never ornate. Near the table's edge rested a stone mortar, its surface worn smooth by years of grinding. A pestle lay beside it, its rounded end darkened where countless roots had been crushed into powder. Though untouched for the moment, it seemed to anchor the room with its weight. Its presence suggested motion without demanding it. Light shifted again as one candle's flame leaned briefly to the side. The reflection across the nearest jar elongated and then contracted. Dust rose and fell in the altered current. Nothing else changed. The shelves held their quiet assembly of glass and plant matter, preserving fragments of distant fields within the steady walls of the shop. In this enclosed space, the boundary between outside and inside felt softened but distinct. The street's cool breath pressed lightly at the window, while the warmth of candlelight settled closer to the table. The shelves stood between these two influences, guardians of dried leaves and roots gathered under open sky and now resting in ordered stillness. And near the table, within reach of the mortar and folded cloth, a small heap of freshly dried leaves waited to be sorted. Stems intertwined, edges crisp, their faint fragrance rising into the calm interior air, as if inviting patient hands to begin their quiet work. The heap of dried leaves lay quietly on the worn surface of the table, awaiting gentle attention. Hands, patient and deliberate, reached toward it, fingers brushing lightly across the curled edges. Each leaf was lifted, examined, and separated by weight, shape, and subtle fragrance, placed in small piles across the table in an arrangement that seemed almost accidental, yet born of practiced familiarity. The motion was slow, rhythmic, without haste or expectation. Candlelight glimmered across the smooth wood, casting long, soft shadows that mirrored the hand's careful movements. Nearby, the mortar and pestle rested in readiness. Occasionally, a root or twig was measured out and placed within, its surface darkened slightly where it had been held. The pestle pressed gently, a small, measured pressure that released earthy aromas into the quiet air. The sound of friction was soft and muted, absorbed by the walls and thickened by the warmth of the room. The air itself seemed to pause, allowing each subtle shift and gentle turn to exist fully before the next. Dust continued to drift in pale threads, rising and settling across the jars and bundles on the shelves. The candle's glow caught it now and again, creating small flickers that danced with the movements of the hands. Every gesture, every touch, was deliberate yet unremarkable, blending naturally with the surrounding stillness. The herbs exhaled faint, layered fragrances, a quiet chorus of rosemary, lavender, thyme, and valerian, the combination neither sharp nor intrusive, but persistent in the gentle manner of accumulated seasons. The wooden surface of the table bore the marks of countless similar evenings. Shallow grooves and smooth patches traced the memory of hands that had worked here before, hands that moved slowly, guided by familiarity. Even in the absence of sound, one could sense the continuity of effort that had shaped the table, the mortar, and the air around them. It was a labor of quiet repetition, observed only by the room itself. Some leaves were brittle, their veins pronounced under the soft light, while others retained a subtle pliancy, slightly curled but not fragile. Each was lifted with care, turning briefly in the flickering illumination before being set aside. Small piles formed along the edge of the table, neat enough to suggest intention but loose enough to appear effortless. The hands adjusted constantly, nudging a stem here, aligning a petal there, maintaining the gentle order that allowed the work to flow uninterrupted. The window above permitted a thin sliver of moonlight to brush against the upper shelves, highlighting jars that contained roots, powders, and further bundles of herbs. Light and shadow moved slowly across their surfaces as the hands shifted, sometimes catching a dust mote that hung in the stillness. The interplay of warm candlelight and cool silver from the moon created a delicate, drowsy contrast across the textures of wood, glass, and leaf. A faint scent of earth mingled with the dried plants, their collected aromas softening further as they were touched, handled, and turned. The mortar, occasionally pressed against with measured firmness, added its own subtle accent, a dry, rooty note that mingled seamlessly with the gentler fragrances. Each action seemed to draw more of the room into quiet attentiveness, encouraging the senses to follow the slow, deliberate flow. From time to time, a bundle of leaves was opened, its twine slipping aside with a faint creak. Stems were separated, folded, or sometimes lightly crushed to test their readiness for preparation. Nothing was done in haste. The hands paused frequently, letting the senses guide each motion. The process was steady, continuous, and entirely without urgency. Even the smallest movement appeared to extend the stillness of the room rather than interrupt it. The shadows along the shelves shifted as the candles swayed imperceptibly, the hands moving in concert with the gentle light. Every leaf picked up a brief highlight before returning to muted tones. Dust danced lazily in the beams, rising, curving, and then sinking back down, always in harmony with the unhurried rhythm of the work. The mortar, the pestle, the wooden table, the small piles of sorted leaves, all seemed to exist in a delicate, patient choreography. The scent deepened subtly when herbs were handled, releasing faint oils that lingered in the air. Rosemary, in particular, offered a sharp undertone tempered by the sweeter, softer tones of lavender and chamomile. Each inhalation was calm, almost imperceptible, yet present. The room seemed to hold its breath in alignment with the slow motions, expanding slightly with the rhythm of careful, unhurried attention. The arrangement of jars, bundles, and the table itself suggested quiet knowledge. There was no rush to consume or transform the materials. The purpose lay instead in the act of tending, in the steady alignment of objects and hands, in the soft, continuous care of what had been gathered. The repetition was meditative, a gentle cadence that invited the observer to follow without effort or strain. Occasionally, a fragment of a leaf would drift from the table onto the floor. It would settle there, unnoticed and undisturbed, part of the accumulation of small, silent movements that characterized the space. Nothing demanded correction or attention. Each fragment seemed to affirm the calm order of the room, contributing subtly to the sense of continuity and stillness. The hands moved from pile to pile, lifting, aligning, pressing, and occasionally releasing a leaf back to the table to reassess its place. In this rhythm, the room seemed to breathe lightly, responding to every motion. Shadows and light played across surfaces, dust and dried plant matter, enhancing the sense of depth and quiet intimacy. The moment elongated, stretching without need of conclusion. Beyond the table, the shelves remained a quiet presence, their glass jars immobile yet full of potential. Each vessel, carefully positioned, suggested careful preparation, each corked and sealed with patience and care. The hands on the table carried out the continuation of that care, echoing the quiet diligence that had established the room long ago. Every turn of a leaf and press of the pestle contributed to the atmosphere, a tactile, sensory extension of the stillness. The mortar and pestle rested gently in partial shadow, their surfaces darkened with use, yet stable and ready for further engagement. Small piles of leaves, arranged across the table, waited without urgency, their positioning hinting at the next action without pressuring it. The candlelight flickered, the moonlight rested upon the shelves, and the space existed fully within this slow, quiet movement. The apothecary's hands continued in soft, deliberate gestures. Each movement, each touch, resonated in a room already attuned to subtlety and calm. The leaves, the jars, the mortar, and the table combined to form a space where nothing hurried, nothing demanded attention, and yet everything was tended with care. In that gentle order, the room's rhythm deepened, preparing naturally for the next stages of work, while allowing each moment to linger softly. The door to the garden opened with a soft creak, the wood yielding without complaint as it pivoted on iron hinges well worn by the passing of seasons. Beyond it, the courtyard stretched quietly, bordered by low stone walls that had absorbed decades of sun and rain. The air was cooler here, carrying with it the delicate sense of soil, grass, and early dew, mingling with the lingering fragrance of dried herbs from inside. A narrow path, lightly worn by careful steps, led between beds of greenery, winding gently as it traced the perimeter of the garden. Rows of plants rested patiently within the enclosure. Rosemary grew in structured clumps, its stiff stems rising upright, leaves glinting faintly in the waning moonlight. Lavender bent slightly under the weight of small dew droplets, which captured the pale illumination and refracted it into soft glimmers. Chamomile flowers nodded in the gentle evening breeze, their cream-colored petals delicate against the darker soil. Each bed was bordered by small stones or rough-hewn timbers, providing a subtle frame to the organic growth within. The garden exuded quiet order. Paths were defined but unobtrusive, meandering between the beds in lines that seemed guided by intuition rather than formal planning. The earth between the plants was dark, rich, and slightly damp, pressed down from careful tending and light rain earlier in the day. Tiny rivulets reflected the candlelight from the house as it spilled faintly across the doorway, glimmering like whispered movement among the leaves. A faint, nearly imperceptible rustle moved through the foliage as the night air shifted. Leaves swayed gently in response, releasing faint earthy and floral scents into the stillness. The movement was minimal, almost ceremonious, as if the garden itself acknowledged the presence of another caretaker without requiring direct attention. Shadows stretched long across the soil, folding over each other and softening the contrast between plant and path. At one corner, a patch of mint grew low to the ground, its small leaves clustered tightly together. The scent was subtle yet unmistakable, rising to mingle with the richer aromas of rosemary and lavender. The hands that had sorted leaves inside had once tended to these very plants, measuring the distance between sprouts, trimming excess growth, and noting the variations of color in each leaf. That labor, carried out in quiet, unhurried repetition, left a trace not of disturbance but of gentle cultivation. The moon hung low, its light spilling silver across the tips of taller herbs. Shadows followed the contours of the earth, softening the edges of every stone, every raised bed. Even the smallest weeds, though carefully removed during daylight hours, seemed to pause in the faint illumination, as though granted a brief moment of quiet existence before yielding to the orderly arrangement of the garden. Paths led to small clearings where the soil had been freshly turned. Tiny ridges marked the line of a trowel, and here and there, faint impressions in the earth told of seeds recently planted. The work was subtle, almost invisible unless observed closely, but it carried a continuity that bridged one season to the next. The garden itself seemed to breathe in a slow, deliberate rhythm, each bed a quiet statement of care and patience. In the center of the space, a single low trellis arched over a bed of climbing herbs. Its wooden frame was aged, softened by weather and time. Tiny shoots wound gently around its supports, some resting against the beams, others reaching upward with a careful persistence. The moonlight caught their curves, tracing delicate lines that seemed drawn for no eye in particular. Even the smallest tendrils held a measured purpose, part of the quiet geometry of growth. Along the edges of the wall, ivy trailed downward, its leaves catching the faintest glimmers of candlelight escaping from the apothecary. Each leaf rested momentarily on its neighbor, creating a layered surface of gentle green and silver. Where stones were exposed, tiny mosses clung close, adding soft texture and muted color to the visual composition of the garden. Nothing was rigid, nothing hurried, each element existed in a patient balance. The air itself carried a sense of calm observance. A single insect traced a slow path along the edge of a leaf, pausing here and there, its movement deliberate and unhurried. The scent of the garden rose in subtle waves, the mixture of herbs, moist soil, and the faint residue of candle warmth from inside forming a layered, immersive presence. It did not demand attention, but it was undeniably present, as though the garden and the room were in quiet conversation. Along one bed, chamomile had begun to scatter seeds of its own accord. Tiny white dots rested lightly against the soil, evidence of gentle continuation rather than sudden action. A small stream of dew caught on their edges, reflecting both candle and moonlight in tiny flashes before fading into the surrounding damp earth. The interplay of light and water, plant and soil, contributed to the garden's slow, serene rhythm. Each plant seemed to exist independently yet in relation to the others. Lavender and rosemary, mint and chamomile, each held its place with understated dignity. The spacing of the beds allowed air to circulate freely, and shadows from the surrounding walls fell softly, ensuring that the light of the moon and the faint candle glow could mingle evenly across the foliage. This careful balance created a sense of unity, a natural order that did not impose itself but simply was. A small stone bench rested against the far wall. Its surface was cold and firm, smoothed by years of exposure. It offered a place to pause, to observe the subtle shifts in the garden, and to feel the rhythm of growth and stillness alike. Moss gathered lightly along the edges, softening its outline, and faint lines in the stone suggested the gradual passage of time and attention. Paths curved gently around the beds, guiding footsteps without demanding focus. Each turn revealed slightly different groupings of plants, variations in color and texture. The senses were engaged softly: the smell of crushed leaves, the subtle texture of stone and earth underfoot, the muted movement of stems in the night air. The garden invited observation, yet allowed the mind to rest, to wander slowly and without urgency. Near the far corner, a small collection of herbs was poised for the next day's attention. Each plant, though resting now, had been nurtured with careful hands, trimmed, measured, and tended according to long practice. Their placement in this secluded corner offered both convenience and quiet contemplation, a pause within the larger flow of the garden's calm. The garden, enclosed yet open to the sky, offered an expansive sense of continuity. The moonlight and candle glow intertwined across walls, paths, and leaves, while the air carried a tapestry of fragrance, moisture, and warmth. Each element, plant, stone, shadow, and dew, was aligned in soft harmony, creating a space that neither rushed nor demanded, but simply existed, patient and ready. And so, at the edge of one carefully tended bed, the first hint of a particular herb caught the soft illumination. Its leaves, still untouched by hands tonight, rested lightly on the soil. The quiet anticipation of observation awaited, suggesting the next steps without insistence, as the garden itself breathed with the gentle rhythm of evening. The soft illumination of moonlight and candle glow fell across the small bed, highlighting a single plant that had quietly captured attention. Its leaves were modest, not large or showy, yet they bore the subtle intricacies of careful growth. Veins traced delicate paths along each surface, pale against the gentle green of the leaf. Tiny hairs, scarcely visible, caught the light and seemed to shimmer in a faint, almost ethereal glow. Each movement of the leaves in the mild evening breeze was slow, measured, like the gentle breathing of the garden itself. The hands moved closer, not to disturb but to observe, fingertips hovering above the tender stems. One finger lightly brushed along the edge of a leaf, tracing the outline, feeling the subtle textures, noting the faint resistance where the leaf curved and softened. Another hand rested lightly on the soil at the base, sensing its coolness, the faint moisture that clung to the earth. Every motion was deliberate yet unhurried, each gesture an act of quiet attention rather than intervention. Around the plant, small dew droplets lingered in the dim light. They held fragments of moonlight, reflecting the flicker of the candle from inside, creating tiny, shifting stars on each leaf. The hands allowed the droplets to remain undisturbed, moving carefully to avoid their displacement. A slight breath of air stirred them occasionally, and the leaves adjusted minutely in response, their subtle motion magnified by the stillness of the surroundings. The garden exhaled in this interaction. Every plant nearby seemed to settle, as if acknowledging the presence of careful observation. Lavender tipped slightly with the faintest ripple, rosemary bristled gently, and chamomile blossoms shifted toward the tender light. None of these movements demanded notice. They were simply part of the ongoing rhythm of growth, quietly acknowledged by patient hands. The soil itself seemed alive in quiet ways. Small stones rested beneath the earth, touched lightly by roots, and the slight depressions and ridges left by past cultivation offered a soft texture under the palms. Fingers pressed gently against the ground, sensing the firmness, the minor variances that indicated moisture and density. Such tactile observation was a part of tending, a silent dialogue with the life growing above it. Occasionally, a leaf was turned over to inspect its underside. Tiny veins created an intricate lattice, and faint color variations suggested subtle differences in nourishment and exposure. The hands adjusted lightly, turning leaves only as necessary, avoiding any abrupt motion. The process was one of patient recognition, a slow cataloging of shape, tone, and resilience without hurry or judgment. The candlelight cast gentle shadows across the surrounding beds. Every small movement shifted these shapes ever so slightly, creating a delicate interplay of light and form. Dust motes, rising and falling in the calm air, caught in this illumination, tracing graceful arcs before settling again. The visual rhythm mirrored the careful observation, reinforcing the serene and unhurried character of the evening. Across the small bed, tiny shoots emerged from the soil, barely perceptible at first glance. They reached tentatively toward available light, stretching their new leaves with quiet persistence. The hands hovered close, neither pressing nor pulling, simply noting the tender growth. These young shoots embodied the continuity of the garden, linking previous seasons to the present and hinting at those yet to come. The soft scent of herbs rose with each subtle motion. Rosemary's sharper tones were tempered by the lavender and chamomile, creating a layered fragrance that was perceptible yet gentle. The hands, attentive to touch and smell alike, moved slowly, allowing each sensory impression to settle before proceeding to the next. The experience was immersive, absorbing the observer into a meditative pace that invited calm. Every leaf's orientation, each subtle bend, and minor imperfection was acknowledged without alteration unless necessary for care. Occasionally, a curled edge was gently eased into place, the tip aligned along the natural line of growth. Such adjustments were minimal and performed with a lightness that preserved the overall stillness of the bed. The act of observation was itself a form of tending, requiring neither haste nor insistence. A faint breeze whispered through the space beyond the wall, stirring leaves in neighboring beds. The motion was subtle, a slow ripple that carried soft sounds of rustling. The hands paused with each movement, permitting the plant to respond naturally, the interaction measured and patient. There was no urgency, only the continuous, quiet attention to detail that defined the night's routine. The moonlight shifted gradually, elongating shadows and touching different surfaces of the plant with changing angles. A vein, a tiny bud, the curl of a leaf, all were accentuated momentarily before receding into the soft silver of dusk. The hands adapted to these changes, following the contours, adjusting the angle of touch, always preserving the gentle tempo of observation. In the distance, the taller herbs leaned slightly, mirroring the gentle inclinations of the observed plant. Lavender, mint, and chamomile together formed a quiet chorus of motion, imperceptible to any eye not attuned to patience. The hands moved between them lightly, allowing each plant its own expression while maintaining a subtle awareness of the whole bed. Observation was continuous, encompassing, yet never intrusive. The soil, the dew, and the tender leaves were attended to in minimal gestures. Fingers brushed along stems, lightly dusted away specks of earth, or turned a leaf for clearer view. The rhythm of the hands matched the rhythm of the garden, slow, deliberate, and unhurried. The act of noticing became the act of care, each subtle motion reinforcing the calm atmosphere. Nearby, the edges of the bed held small, overlooked seedlings. They were not less important than the established plant. Rather, they contributed to the living mosaic of the space. The hands paused at each, lifting slightly to glimpse the delicate shapes, the tender green against the muted brown of soil. No rush dictated their attention, only a steady, calm presence that allowed each sprout to exist within its own quiet moment. The observation extended to the spaces between plants as well. Stones, slight mounds of earth, and traces of fallen leaves were all noted in gentle sweeps of the hand. The senses absorbed these subtleties: texture, temperature, moisture, and the faint fragrance of the soil. Each impression reinforced a tranquil awareness of the entire garden, where no detail was too small and nothing pressed for action. As the night deepened, the soft blend of candlelight and moonlight shifted again, highlighting different facets of the plants. The hands continued their patient survey, attentive to curves, edges, and tiny deviations, all while allowing the surrounding shadows to move and change naturally. The garden remained serene, each plant a quiet participant in the unfolding rhythm, each movement deliberate and delicate. And so, a particular leaf caught the light in such a way that it seemed almost to glow, the smallest movements of the hands accentuating the subtle textures and colors. Observation continued, neither hurried nor distracted, as if the night itself had slowed to match the careful, meditative tempo of the caretaker. The apothecary returned to the quiet interior, carrying the selected leaves, stems, and small roots with gentle care. The door closed softly behind, muffling the faint sounds of night beyond. The wooden floor beneath his feet absorbed each step, and the faint warmth of the candlelight welcomed him back into the familiar space. Shelves lined with jars, each containing dried and preserved herbs, reflected the flicker of the flame, casting long, delicate shadows that shifted slowly across the walls. He laid each bundle carefully on the worn work table, arranging them as though the order itself were a quiet meditation. The mortar, smooth and darkened with frequent use, awaited at the center of the table. Fingers moved over the surfaces of the gathered herbs, feeling their texture and weight. Leaves were separated again, roots smoothed, and small twigs aligned gently, ready for the precise, repetitive movements that would follow. The motions were unhurried, almost ceremonial, each one reinforcing the stillness of the room and the rhythm of the work. Every touch released faint, earthy scents into the air, blending with the lingering aroma of candle wax and polished wood. A small pestle rested alongside the mortar, waiting for the first contact with the carefully prepared herbs. When it touched the first leaf, a soft, grinding sound emerged, subtle yet continuous, accompanied by the muted scent of crushed plant matter. Each turn of the pestle was deliberate and slow, pressing gently, rolling with measured pressure, as if the herbs themselves were guiding the pace. The sound was not intrusive, merely a soft accent to the calm breathing of the room, accompanying the shifting shadows and quiet reflections of light. Leaves, once finely ground, were gently sifted into small piles, the subtle difference in texture recognized through careful observation. Roots, fibrous and firm, were cut into smaller sections before being pressed and ground. Each action took time, an unhurried process of transformation that preserved the integrity of the ingredients while preparing them for eventual use. The hands moved with steady repetition, aligning fragments, redistributing powders, and ensuring that no movement broke the gentle tempo established from the moment he entered. Between grinding sessions, the apothecary paused to rotate the pestle, to adjust the position of a leaf or stem, and to breathe in the faintly sweet and earthy mixture that filled the air. Candlelight flickered across the surfaces, revealing textures that might otherwise go unnoticed: the subtle striations of a leaf, the tiny cracks along a root, the powdery residue of a previously prepared batch. Every detail was acknowledged, softly, without hurry, and the motions continued, uninterrupted, like a slow, delicate dance. The surrounding jars seemed to observe silently, their glass surfaces catching the flicker of the flame and refracting it into faint, dancing glimmers. Some contained dried flowers, pale and delicate; others, more earthy roots and bark, dark and textured. These silent companions provided a sense of continuity, a reminder of countless evenings spent in similar motion, preserving the ritual and rhythm that governed the space. Nothing demanded attention, everything existed in quiet balance. A small stream of loose dust rose with each gentle turn of the pestle, floating briefly before settling again on the table, the mortar, or the edges of a nearby jar. Tiny motes caught the candlelight, shimmering softly, emphasizing the slow passage of time in this confined yet expansive space. Hands adjusted their movements to accommodate the subtleties, ensuring that each motion reinforced rather than disrupted the calm. Occasionally, a small amount of ground herb was lifted with careful fingers and transferred to another surface, a soft brushing motion that allowed each particle to settle naturally. No action was hurried, every transfer was guided by patience and attentiveness. The hands seemed to understand the nature of the ingredients, moving in harmony with their texture and form. The gentle friction, soft weight, and muted sound of powder and leaf became part of the room's quiet symphony. The apothecary's movements were punctuated only by the subtle shift of light, the flickering flame, and the muted sounds of materials being prepared. Each stroke of the pestle, each adjustment of a leaf or root, maintained a deliberate and steady cadence. Even as he shifted focus from one bundle to another, the atmosphere remained uniform, a seamless continuation of observation and care that required no conscious attention from an outside observer. It simply existed. A particularly fragrant leaf, pressed just enough to release its oils, contributed a gentle aroma that mingled with the existing blend. Fingers paused briefly to allow the scent to saturate the air, then returned to the ongoing cycle of grinding and sifting. The process was immersive, requiring attention yet inviting calm, establishing a rhythm that both body and mind could follow effortlessly. As the grinding continued, small containers were positioned at the edges of the table, ready to receive measured amounts of prepared herbs. Each movement was slow and precise, the apothecary's hands guiding powders and small fragments with gentle pressure. The candlelight emphasized subtle differences in color and texture, highlighting the careful selection and handling of each ingredient. Shadows lengthened and softened across the wooden surface, accentuating the quiet elegance of the work. The act of mixing followed naturally. Powders, ground leaves, and sliced roots were combined in shallow vessels, each stirred in small, deliberate motions. No motion was abrupt. Each rotation of the spoon or pestle was slow, allowing textures to merge and scents to blend seamlessly. The mixture itself seemed to settle gradually, aligning with the patient, unhurried rhythm of the hands, the room, and the soft illumination. Time moved indistinctly, measured only by the continuous, gentle motions of preparation. The mortar and pestle, the small bundles of herbs, the shallow vessels, and the steady hands formed a cohesive pattern, a quiet ritual of transformation. Each element interacted with the others in a harmonious, almost imperceptible balance, reinforcing the calm, immersive character of the evening. The work was ongoing without urgency, yet purposeful in its persistence. At the far end of the table, the final herbs were ground, sifted, and mixed. Tiny adjustments were made to ensure the composition was even, the colors muted but distinct, the aromas blending seamlessly. The candlelight highlighted faint differences in texture and sheen, revealing the care taken in every subtle motion. Shadows moved slowly, stretching across surfaces and tracing the contours of the mixture, emphasizing its gentle presence within the space. Hands paused occasionally, brushing away small fragments of leaf or root, ensuring the workspace remained tidy yet undisturbed in its soft, quiet order. The mortar and pestle rested momentarily between movements, ready for the next cycle of preparation. The room itself seemed to participate in the rhythm, echoing the calm cadence established through deliberate, gentle repetition. Every motion was absorbed into the ambient stillness, enhancing the sense of continuity and serenity. And so, the herbs, roots, and leaves were transformed under the patient guidance of hands that knew each nuance, each texture, and each subtle shift. The materials, now prepared and blended, rested in quiet anticipation of the next stage. The rhythm of the night, the soft friction of grinding, and the delicate movement of powders carried the space gently forward, readying it for what would come next. The prepared mixtures rested in shallow bowls, the colors muted yet distinct under the soft glow of candlelight. The apothecary's hands hovered for a moment, allowing the gentle illumination to emphasize the subtle textures and slight variations in tone across each blend. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted a small amount of the powder with a wooden spoon, feeling its weight and texture, and began transferring it into a waiting glass jar. The faint scratch of the spoon against the ceramic bowl mingled with the soft whisper of the candle flame, creating a rhythm that filled the room without breaking the silence. Each jar received its portion with patient attention. The mixtures settled gradually, a soft, almost imperceptible shift of tiny fragments as they conformed to the contours of the containers. Occasionally, the apothecary tilted the jar gently, ensuring that no air pockets remained and that each powder lay evenly across the base. The act was quiet, repetitive, yet meditative, a motion that seemed to stretch time and draw the surrounding shadows into a slower, more deliberate pace. Once filled, the jars were moved in small, careful increments across the wooden table. The apothecary aligned them side by side, their muted colors forming a subtle mosaic against the dark surface. He adjusted each vessel slightly, turning it to catch the candlelight in a specific way, accentuating the depth of hue or the faint sheen on the surface of the mixture. The process was meticulous yet unhurried, a study in calm repetition, each movement reinforcing the quiet rhythm established through the evening's labor. The shelves nearby awaited their careful arrangement. One by one, jars were lifted and placed upon the planks, their soft weight acknowledged by the hands before being set down. The apothecary paid attention to spacing, ensuring that each container had room to breathe, that the order of placement allowed for ease of access while maintaining a visual harmony. Shadows shifted slowly across the surfaces, the flickering candlelight tracing patterns over glass and powder, highlighting the textures and subtle irregularities that made each jar unique. Occasionally, a small tilt of the head, a slight turn of the body, or the adjustment of a wrist allowed a vessel to sit perfectly aligned with its neighbors. The apothecary's movements were smooth, continuous, and unhurried, each gesture blending seamlessly into the next. There was no rush, no pressing need for speed, only the continuous, gentle care of placement and the silent observation of how the mixtures responded to gravity, light, and space. The table itself became a tableau of order. Bowls emptied gradually, their contents transferred to jars with careful, repetitive strokes. The faint residual dust on the table was swept lightly with a soft cloth, absorbed into the motions rather than disturbed by abrupt action. Each sweep of the cloth, each placement of a jar, contributed to the slow unfolding of calm, a quiet meditation that extended beyond the mere act of arranging objects. Small flacons, some containing more delicate blends, were treated with even greater gentleness. The apothecary held each one as though cradling a fragile leaf, tilting to guide the mixture into place without spillage. Their glass surfaces reflected candlelight in muted glimmers, forming miniature constellations of soft shine along the shelves. The process was attentive, careful, yet steady, as if the hands themselves were conducting a quiet, repetitive symphony. The room was filled with the faint, layered scents of the various mixtures. Earthy tones from roots, sweet traces from flowers, herbal crispness from leaves and stems. Each jar carried its own aroma, subtle but distinct, and the hands moved in harmony with these scents, adjusting placement to maintain balance and accessibility. The mingling fragrances rose slowly, a gentle, soothing reminder of the ongoing care and attention given to the gathered ingredients. Between each placement, the apothecary paused, letting the eye travel across the newly organized rows. Light caught small imperfections in the powder, the curve of a jar, the faint residue on a rim, all noticed but met with soft, corrective motion. A slight shift here, a gentle nudge there, ensured alignment and symmetry while preserving the calm and deliberate pace of the evening's work. Small labels, blank for now, were laid aside, their presence a quiet promise of future notation. They rested in a neat stack, waiting patiently as the jars assumed their places. The apothecary's fingers brushed over them intermittently, feeling the texture of paper and ink, the softness against the skin, a sensory complement to the visual and olfactory rhythm that filled the space. The repetition of lifting, filling, and placing was continuous yet gentle. Each movement was absorbed into the quiet fabric of the room, blending with the flicker of the candle, the slow drift of air through a half-open window, and the muted rustle of leaves in an unseen garden. The act of arranging became a meditative dance, reinforcing the unhurried tempo that had carried from the evening's first steps inside. From table to shelf, the mixtures were methodically distributed. The apothecary's eye assessed color gradation, texture variation, and size, aligning vessels to create a sense of order that was visually soothing. The subtle shadows cast along the edges of jars emphasized contours and depth, highlighting the care inherent in each placement. The motion of hands and arms followed a slow, repeating cadence, a quiet ritual of tactile attention. A faint movement of candlelight reminded the apothecary to adjust a row, ensuring consistency in height and spacing. Each adjustment was small, barely perceptible, yet it contributed to the sense of overall harmony in the space. The jars, their contents, and the hands that moved them formed a seamless interplay of light, shadow, texture, and scent, a living stillness that absorbed the observer as completely as it engaged the practitioner. The final few jars were placed gently into their positions. The subtle friction of glass against wood was acknowledged with careful touch, and the final alignment checked with a soft gaze. The shelves now displayed a quiet mosaic of color and texture, each vessel resting in equilibrium, the combined aroma of herbs and roots lingering softly in the air. Even in stillness, the sense of ongoing motion persisted through the gentle repetition of gestures and observation. The apothecary stepped back slightly, letting the eye travel across the table and shelves. Bowls were emptied, flacons aligned, jars ordered, and the candlelight flickered gently, casting elongated shadows and warm illumination across the completed arrangement. Yet the work felt ongoing, the space alive with quiet rhythm, a continuum of care and attention that would continue as the evening unfolded. And so, each mixture had found its place, every vessel aligned in patient order. The rhythm of moving, lifting, and placing became nearly imperceptible, blending into the room itself. Light, shadow, scent, and texture coexisted in calm harmony, each element softly preparing the space for the next steps of care and subtle annotation. The pace remained unhurried, each gesture a continuation of the gentle, meditative flow of the night. The apothecary's fingers lingered briefly over the neatly arranged rows of jars, noting the slight variations in size and hue. Each vessel, now resting on the wooden planks with gentle equilibrium, seemed to invite a final touch, a mark of care that would distinguish it within the quiet harmony of the room. Small labels, blank and soft to the touch, awaited patiently at the edge of the table. Their presence was unobtrusive, yet significant. They would serve as gentle reminders of the contents within, a whisper of order in the midst of the subdued array of mixtures. With deliberate care, the apothecary lifted the first jar, tilting it slightly to ensure stability, and pressed a label against its smooth surface. The paper adhered softly, conforming to the subtle curve of the glass, the slight resistance of the adhesive met with a gentle, steady hand. The motion was slow and measured, a quiet echo of the earlier processes of grinding, sifting, and arranging. The candlelight caressed the edges of the label, emphasizing the textures of both glass and paper, the subtle shadows forming a delicate interplay across the surface. Each subsequent jar received the same thoughtful attention. Fingers traced the contours of glass and powder, guiding the label into place without haste or abruptness. The apothecary paused occasionally, aligning the paper with the faint ridges of the jar, ensuring that it rested with soft symmetry alongside its companions. The room remained silent, save for the occasional soft friction of paper against glass and the muted crackle of the candle flame, reinforcing the meditative rhythm that had carried through the evening. Some labels required slight adjustments. A gentle tilt, a tiny press, a subtle repositioning, each movement was absorbed into the quiet cadence of the work. The apothecary's hands moved fluidly, almost unconsciously, carrying the momentum of repetition while maintaining delicate precision. The act of labeling was both functional and aesthetic, a final caress that acknowledged the care invested in each mixture. Between applications, the apothecary allowed his eyes to travel over the shelves, noting how the lines of jars caught the candlelight. Reflections shimmered softly across glass and powder, revealing minute imperfections and tiny variations that made each container distinct. Shadows stretched gently across the wooden surface, merging with the muted hues of powders and herbs. The combination of light, texture, and scent created a space that was immersive yet serene, where each motion reinforced calm and continuity. After the labels were in place, subtle adjustments followed. Some jars were nudged slightly, rotated to catch the candlelight more evenly, or shifted to maintain visual balance along the planks. The apothecary moved with a fluidity born of repeated care, his gestures unhurried, almost floating from one position to another. There was no need for haste. The hands, the materials, and the light collaborated in quiet understanding, guiding the final arrangement with gentle insistence. Small implements, a wooden spatula, a fine brush, were employed with the same soft touch to clear traces of powder or dust from rims and table edges. Each sweep, each stroke, was performed slowly, ensuring that no abrupt motion disturbed the settled mixtures. The subtle aroma of blended herbs continued to rise, mingling with the faint warmth of candlelight, enveloping the space in an atmosphere of calm, almost tactile tranquility. A few delicate flacons containing the more fragrant blends received additional care. The apothecary held each lightly, inspecting for balance and subtle imperfections, occasionally adjusting the tilt or position to harmonize with surrounding jars. The hands moved with quiet attentiveness, their motions absorbed into the meditative rhythm, a continuation of the earlier sequences of preparation and arrangement. Every gesture reinforced a sense of serenity, of gentle order maintained throughout the room. As labels were added and surfaces smoothed, the apothecary occasionally paused to breathe in the blended scents, savoring the subtle interplay of herbs, roots, and petals. Each aroma was delicate, not overpowering, drifting quietly through the space as a companion to the flickering light. The room seemed to breathe with the movements, expanding slightly as each hand shifted and contracted in measured sequence, the rhythm uninterrupted and continuous. The process repeated in a soft cycle, lifting, labeling, adjusting, inspecting, and smoothing. Candlelight flickered across the surfaces, casting gentle highlights and shadows that played upon glass, powder, and paper. The subtle patterns of reflection moved slowly, unhurried, emphasizing the calm focus of each gesture. Time passed indistinctly, measured only by the steady cadence of hands and the quiet glow of illumination. Toward the end of the labeling, the apothecary's motions became even more fluid, a seamless continuation of earlier rhythms. Each jar, now marked and aligned, reflected the care invested over the hours, meticulous, gentle, and unforced. The room retained a muted harmony, the combined textures of wood, glass, and powder creating a soft backdrop for the last touches. Shadows merged with light, and scent intertwined with tactile rhythm, forming a quiet continuum of observation and attention. Finally, the last label was applied, and the hand lingered for a moment, brushing lightly over the surface to ensure smooth adhesion. Fingers traced the lines of jars, adjusting only slightly, confirming alignment, while the soft glimmer of candlelight highlighted the overall composition. The shelves now bore a uniform display, each container resting in silent balance, the gentle aroma of herbs enveloping the space in a soothing embrace. The apothecary allowed himself a moment to step back, observing the completed sequence of jars, flacons, and labels. The arrangement appeared effortless, yet it bore the imprint of careful, deliberate attention. The light and shadows, the muted colors, and the subtle textures merged into a unified tableau, a testament to patience, rhythm, and quiet diligence. Even in stillness, the meditative cadence of movement seemed to linger, a soft pulse that underscored the serene order of the room. Hands rested momentarily, poised above the table, aware of the gentle interplay between object, light, and scent. There was nothing urgent, no need for further action. Each label, each jar, each subtle adjustment spoke softly of care, continuity, and calm attention. The rhythm of the evening, cultivated over hours of gentle labor, remained alive in the quiet, unbroken silence. And so, with the labels secured and the final touches attended to, the space held a calm completeness. Yet the evening's motion remained gentle and ongoing, an almost imperceptible pulse of attention and care, a continuation of the serene ritual that had carried the apothecary from dusk into night. The work had reached its delicate pause, preparing the space for the next stage of quiet reflection. The apothecary lifted each labeled jar with careful attention, feeling its gentle weight and the smooth resistance of glass against fingers. The journey from the work table to the distant storage shelves was measured, deliberate, and unhurried. Each movement carried the quiet rhythm established through the evening, a soft extension of the ritual that had begun with the grinding and mixing of herbs hours earlier. Shadows stretched across the floorboards as the candlelight flickered, reflecting faintly in the curves of glass and highlighting the muted hues of powders within. The jars were placed into a woven basket, each nested snugly beside its neighbor, the subtle friction of glass against glass producing only the softest whisper. The apothecary paused occasionally, adjusting the arrangement to maintain balance, allowing the weight to distribute evenly, so that no sudden tilt or shift could disrupt the delicate equilibrium. The motion was rhythmic, almost meditative, a continuation of gestures performed countless times yet experienced now with particular attentiveness to stillness and precision. Upon reaching the storage area, the apothecary's eyes followed the rows of shelves waiting patiently in the quiet light. The planks rose gently toward the ceiling, each lined with empty spaces awaiting their appointed contents. With slow, deliberate hands, the first jar was lifted from the basket, its weight acknowledged, its glass body guided carefully along the air before settling softly onto the wooden plank. A gentle tap confirmed its steadiness, a subtle affirmation of placement, and the shadows shifted slightly as candlelight caressed the new addition. The process repeated with quiet patience. Jars were removed, examined, and placed in order of size and content. The apothecary's fingers lingered over each container briefly, noting the way light highlighted the textures of powders and the sheen of glass. Occasionally, a jar was nudged gently to align with its neighbors, maintaining a visual harmony along the shelf. The atmosphere was calm, the act of arranging both deliberate and unobtrusive, as if the space itself absorbed the movements without need for acknowledgement. Each row of jars formed a subtle pattern, colors blending softly, tones shifting gradually from one end of the shelf to the other. The apothecary adjusted spacing with slight movements of the wrist, ensuring that the light touched each vessel with even grace. Candlelight flickered across glass surfaces, creating transient reflections that danced faintly along the walls, contributing to a sense of quiet liveliness without breaking the room's serene rhythm. The scent of herbs, roots, and petals lingered in the air, mingling with the warmth of the wooden shelves and the gentle illumination of the candles. Each container contributed a whisper of aroma, combining to form a soft, layered presence that filled the storage space with subtle depth. The apothecary moved in harmony with these scents, attentive to their source yet undisturbed by their complexity, allowing the senses to guide the placement without urgency. Larger flacons, filled with the more delicate blends, required extra care. The apothecary's hands supported each one fully, tilting and turning to guide them into position along the higher shelves. Each placement was slow, deliberate, and mindful, a careful choreography of light touch and balance. The reflective surfaces caught small glimmers of candlelight, emphasizing the transparency of glass and the muted tones of powders within, a gentle interplay that added depth to the serene arrangement. As the jars ascended the shelves, the apothecary occasionally stepped back to observe the growing tableau. Lines of containers formed quiet, orderly bands along the planks, the symmetry and spacing soft yet intentional. The hands paused, allowing the eye to travel from one row to the next, noting the gentle progression of size and color, the faint variation in labels, and the overall sense of calm cohesion. Each observation informed the next placement, a continuous dialogue between sight, touch, and the rhythm of careful labor. Some jars required minor adjustments. A small tilt, a subtle shift, a nudge to align with neighboring vessels. Each modification was executed slowly, seamlessly, without disrupting the surrounding order. The apothecary's movements maintained a continuity of pace, preserving the meditative quality of the work. Shadows followed each gesture, lengthening and contracting as the candles flickered, forming soft patterns across the shelves and floor that echoed the rhythm of the hands. The basket, now nearly empty, carried only the last few jars. Each was lifted in sequence, handled with the same gentle care, and guided into place with mindful precision. Candlelight highlighted the surfaces, revealing textures and contours, while the faint scent of herbs remained a constant companion. The apothecary's hands moved fluidly, each action merging into the next, the entire process forming a seamless chain of attention, care, and quiet reflection. When the final jar was positioned on the upper shelf, the apothecary allowed a pause, surveying the completed rows. Light and shadow interplayed across glass and powder, the aroma of mixtures weaving softly through the space. The shelves appeared alive with the memory of careful hands, each container a testament to patience and meticulous rhythm. Yet there was no sense of completion, only a gentle suspension, a quiet acknowledgement that the process had reached a point of serene equilibrium. The apothecary's gaze drifted along the lines of jars, noting the subtle variations, the soft glimmers of candlelight, and the faint scent lingering in the air. Fingers brushed lightly over surfaces as a final gesture, confirming balance, symmetry, and the ongoing calm of the arrangement. The space was silent, yet full, the gentle pulse of motion still perceptible in the shadows and reflections, a quiet continuation of the evening's meticulous work. Even as stillness settled, there remained the sense of rhythm in the room, the slow, deliberate movements now embedded in the light, the air, and the muted scent. The apothecary stepped back, allowing the eyes to take in the entirety of the storage shelves, the careful placement of each jar, and the interplay of shadow, glass, and powder. The observation itself became part of the ritual, a soft, contemplative pause that extended the quiet energy into the surrounding space. The room held a gentle balance. Light, shadow, scent, and carefully positioned jars coexisted in a calm harmony. The apothecary's hands rested, aware of the continuity of rhythm and the serene arrangement of mixtures, yet ready to return if necessary to maintain the subtle equilibrium. The act of storing and shelving had transformed the space, leaving it orderly, fragrant, and softly alive, yet entirely conducive to quiet reflection and rest. The apothecary remained still for a moment, letting his gaze wander over the neatly arranged shelves. Each jar, each flagon, seemed to hold a quiet echo of the evening's labor, their contents now secured and labeled, resting with gentle dignity. Candlelight flickered softly, casting elongated shadows across the floor and walls, mingling with the muted glow that filtered through the small windows. The room held a warmth that was more than physical, a calm suffusing the air, carrying the subtle sense of dried herbs, roots, and petals in a gentle, drifting embrace. Hands folded lightly over one another, the apothecary took a slow, deliberate breath, sensing the tranquility that lingered in the quiet intervals between flickers of light. The air seemed to expand and contract with each inhale, carrying a sense of softness that resonated through the small chamber. The rhythmic pulse of the earlier work, the grinding, sifting, labeling, and arranging, had diminished into a faint, almost imperceptible echo, yet its memory lingered in the careful alignment of jars and the soft texture of the wooden surfaces. He allowed his eyes to drift along the rows of containers, tracing the faint variations in color and opacity, the subtle differences in size and shape that made each one quietly distinct. Some jars reflected the candlelight with a soft glimmer, others held the diffused glow within, the powders and petals absorbing and refracting the warmth. The air was still, except for the occasional whisper of flame, a gentle murmur that accompanied the contemplative silence, forming a delicate rhythm that harmonized with the soft pulse of his own breathing. Occasionally, the apothecary's hand reached toward a nearby jar, brushing lightly along its rim, more as a habitual gesture than a necessary adjustment. The movement was soft, fluid, and entirely unhurried, a reflection of the meditative pace that had permeated the evening. Each touch was fleeting, leaving no trace, yet reinforcing the connection between caretaker and collection, the gentle acknowledgement of attention and care that had guided the night. From the small window, the last hints of twilight faded into the evening sky. Shadows deepened across the room, melding with the warmth of candlelight and the faint luminescence reflecting off glass surfaces. The aroma of herbs became more pronounced in the cooler air, drifting subtly through the space in soft, undulating waves. The apothecary inhaled slowly, letting the combined fragrance and muted light fill him with a sense of calm contentment, a quiet awareness that the work of the evening had gently reached its final rhythm. His gaze lingered on the interplay of shadow and light, noting how the glint of glass and the soft textures of powders created patterns that shifted with each flicker of flame. The room seemed suspended between wakefulness and slumber, a threshold where time slowed and each motion, however small, was absorbed into the serene continuum of evening. The apothecary allowed the senses to wander over surfaces, light and scent, each detail observed with gentle attentiveness yet without urgency, letting the moment extend into itself. With a slow exhale, he shifted his position slightly, resting his hands upon the table's edge, feeling the smooth worn wood beneath his fingertips. The rhythm of the night, the repeated gestures of preparation, arranging and adjustment, had now softened into an almost imperceptible hum. The subtle alignment of jars, the faint glimmers in candlelight, and the quiet fragrance of dried herbs together formed a delicate mosaic of calm that filled the space without intrusion or demand. The apothecary's eyes swept upward to the upper shelves, noting the symmetry of jars and flacons, the orderly arrangement achieved through careful, repeated gestures. Each object seemed to hold a memory of touch, a quiet acknowledgement of patience and deliberate attention. The movement of the light over glass and powder, the faint shadows stretching and contracting with the candle flame, created a soft, temporal rhythm that blended seamlessly with the muted scent in the air. The room itself felt alive, not with urgency or activity, but with a quiet, contemplative presence that enveloped every surface and corner. As he continued to observe, the mind of the apothecary drifted gently, tracing patterns and sequences with no need for analysis or resolution. The eye followed lines of jars, the subtle differences in hue, the gentle shimmer of reflective surfaces. The faint aroma of herbs intertwined with the warmth of the candlelight, producing a sensation of continuity and balance. Each breath deepened the sense of calm, each movement of the hands reinforced the serene attention that had guided the evening's work. The faint creak of the wooden floor under his shifting weight was absorbed into the broader stillness, becoming part of the room's quiet symphony. The candle flame flickered and leaned toward the soft drafts drifting from the window, casting delicate, moving shadows across the carefully organized shelves. The apothecary's hands rested lightly, poised but not tense, aware of the silent harmony that filled the space, a slow continuation of the gentle rhythm that had carried him from the earliest preparations to this quiet culmination. The room seemed to breathe with him, a shared rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, a slow pulse embedded in light, shadow, and scent. The jars, each now labeled and settled, were witnesses to the attentive care invested in their arrangement, and yet their presence was unobtrusive, blending seamlessly into the ambient tranquility. The apothecary's gaze drifted along the shelves once more, absorbing the serene balance and the subtle variations that made each container quietly unique. In these final moments before the night fully deepened, the apothecary allowed himself to become fully aware of the calm he had cultivated. The soft illumination, the gentle fragrance, the quiet presence of orderly jars, and the lingering echoes of careful hands all merged into a harmonious whole. The awareness was subtle, a quiet contemplation that neither demanded action nor sought conclusion, simply existing as a gentle companion to the fading evening light. It was a space where thought could soften, where attention could wander without focus, and where the calm established over the evening flowed effortlessly into the night. Even as the last flickers of candlelight waned, the apothecary remained present, observing the arrangement with a patient, tranquil gaze. The shadows deepened, the aroma shifted subtly with the cooling air, and the stillness grew more pronounced. Time seemed to dissolve into the gentle rhythm of perception, the room holding a quiet continuity that required nothing beyond attentive presence. The jars rested, the shelves reflected the soft light, and the space felt complete without a need for completion, ready to gently carry the evening into the silence that followed. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down. Let your thoughts drift where they want to go. And allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here, gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights, and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well.